Midnight approaches in New Delhi. Inside the Constitution Hall, the air is thick with anticipation. It is August 14th, 1947, and in just a few minutes, nearly 2 centuries of British rule will officially end. Jawaharlal Nehru rises to address the assembly, delivering his historic promise that India will wake to life and freedom, redeeming a pledge made long ago. But just beyond the capital's borders, cities are ablaze. The transition of power is accompanied by mass displacement, fear, and escalating sectarian violence. Before the clock strikes 12, philosopher S. Radhakrishnan takes the floor. He issues a stark warning, acknowledging the deep sorrow and bloodshed that cloud the night's rejoicing, reminding the room that their new power comes with heavy responsibilities. The subcontinent didn't arrive at this fractured climax through a simple handover. This midnight hour is the boiling point of a 90-year pressure cooker. To understand the tension of 1947, we have to look back to May 11, 1857. A band of rebellious sepoys from Meerut crossed the Jamuna River and marched on the Red Fort, launching the first major armed challenge to the British East India Company. The rebellion was aggressively suppressed. The East India Company was dissolved, but in its place, the British Crown established direct, tightened control over the subcontinent. The armed resistance didn't die with the sepoys. It decentralized, moving away from the urban centers and deep into the rural forests. Indigenous communities launched a series of fierce uprisings. Leaders like Birsa Munda organized the Ulgulan, the Great Tumult, mobilizing his people against restrictive forest laws across the central and eastern regions. These rebellions were fueled by the British zamindari system. Excessive taxes displaced peasants from their lands, making armed revolt the only option. These 19th-century revolts were localized and eventually defeated by superior imperial firepower, yet they kept the embers of anti-colonial resistance burning, exposing structural vulnerabilities in the British foundation. By the early 20th century, the strategy evolved. The Indian National Congress began channeling fragmented local grievances into a unified political force, drawing massive crowds to directly challenge government authority. Mahatma Gandhi arrived with a new tactical approach: mass civil disobedience. He organized nationwide boycotts, protests, and strikes designed to completely paralyze the colonial administration. This strategy relied entirely on numbers. It required pulling millions of everyday citizens out of their homes and placing them directly in the line of imperial fire. This created a profound sociological shift. Women stepped out of the domestic sphere, breaking strict patriarchal norms to organize rallies, picket foreign goods, and lead the physical fight in the streets. Leaders like Kamala Nehru and Aruna Asaf Ali faced arrest and indefinite detention, establishing women as primary actors in the landscape of political imprisonment. The tension peaked in 1942 with the Quit India movement. Millions demanded an immediate end to British rule, and the colonial government responded with brutal force, leaving protesters lying face down in the smoke of tear gas and gunfire. In less than a century, the independence movement had outgrown the displaced aristocrats of 1857. It was now a demographic certainty, an awakening of the entire populace that could no longer be contained. While civil disobedience paralyzed the interior, the outbreak of World War II opened a new militant front in the dense jungles of Southeast Asia. Exiled leader Subhas Chandra Bose adopted a radically different strategy from Gandhi's nonviolence, raising an armed force composed of Indian prisoners of war, the Indian National Army. The INA marched alongside the Japanese toward the Indo-Burma front. They were eventually defeated and forced to retreat, but when the British brought the surviving officers back to India for treason trials, the public response was absolute unified outrage. This anger bled directly into the colonial armed forces, culminating in February 1946 with the Royal Indian Navy Mutiny. Frustrated by broken wartime promises and discriminatory treatment, Indian naval ratings violently seized control of their own ships. Ashore, the Bombay working class brought the city to a standstill with massive sympathy strikes. Urgent telegrams flooded the military chain of command. The British administration realized they were losing control of the very instruments of state violence they relied on to govern. The naval mutiny was a fatal blow to the colonial structure. Once the military enforcers turned against the crown, holding India became mathematically and militarily impossible. By 1947, the British Empire was financially ruined by the Second World War and faced an openly rebellious colonial army. They needed a rapid exit strategy, overseen by Lord Mountbatten. The Mountbatten Plan called for the immediate transfer of power and the partition of the subcontinent, guided by hastily drawn borders known as the Radcliffe Line. Decades of colonial policies that had formalized religious divisions suddenly ignited. As the jagged border was announced, the political lines on a map became fractures on the ground. Millions of people were forced to flee their homes. Overcrowded trains moved in both directions across the new borders, carrying refugees into a maelstrom of extreme sectarian violence and displacement. The long-sought independence arrived, but it was permanently scarred by one of history's most devastating humanitarian crises. On the night of August 14th, the Assembly members stand to take their official pledge to serve a free India. But the man who engineered this mass awakening is notably absent from the celebration. Mahatma Gandhi chose to spend Independence Day in the riot-torn regions of Bengal, fasting to quell the violence. The British withdrawal followed 90 years of mounting domestic pressure and systemic breakdown. Independence was forced by the blood of sepoys, defiance of forest tribals, courage of millions of women, and the mutiny of colonial sailors. The world's largest democracy began its journey at midnight, carrying the specific, heavy weight of its century-long struggle and the immediate scars of its final year.